Good morning, everybody. Dr. Pete here. And in today's broadcast, we're going to be talking about, at least initially, we're going to be discussing this surge of obesity drugs that are now coming onto the market. And the relevance of this to my normal listeners are that we're talking about the same central biochemistry here that's driving obesity, diabetes, gout. So to my gout sufferers, I want to let you know that the value of this is that we're talking about the same biochemistry that's driving gout. Today's focus is going to be in a more general way. Let me adjust my camera a little bit. On these chronic metabolic diseases that are afflicting us, because the same central biochemistry is driving these diseases, whether or not you are suffering from diabetes and or obesity and or gout and or cardiovascular disease depends on your overall constellation of genetics, how you're responding to the environment that you're in. And when we talk about the environment that you're exposed to, I'm talking about the food environment. I'm talking about the level of activity that you participate in, levels of sleep and stress. I'm talking about the global environment in which that you live, and how your genetics responds to that environment determines down the road which of these ailments that you're going to show up with. Now, so that's what we're going to be discussing today. I was inspired to do this broadcast today because I follow the media like a lot of people do, and you cannot ignore the amount of articles, the amount of news broadcasts that are talking about people that are taking these GLP-1 agonists, things like Wegovy and Ozempic and et cetera down the line, and now the serious side effects that are involved in these. So let's just go directly to the talk. So here's the question that I have, and hopefully the people that really need to see this will somehow see this broadcast today, because I saw this publication yesterday about the mother who died of the side effects of the Ozempic she was taking for weight loss. And so my question to all of you out there, is getting healthy worth losing your life over? And are there alternative ways in which you can have weight loss, that you can reverse diabetes, that you can put gout in remission? Are there other ways to do this out there besides what it seems like in our culture suggests that the only way to do this is to go to the doctor and get a pill? And oftentimes, the way that we approach trying to solve our health problems in terms of metabolics, right, in terms of what we're eating, in terms of our exercise, the sleep, the stress, and all of those components, which all are systemic, right? So the difference between something that is metabolic and breaking your arm, as an example, is that metabolic issues are systemic. They're not because of one thing. So the idea that you can take a pill, alter one thing, and that somehow altering that one thing is now going to fix everything is flawed. It doesn't work that way. We're dealing here with a systemic issue. And therefore, in order to reverse that systemic issue, we're going to have a systemic approach to fixing the system. And in order to come up with an approach that will solve this overall systemic problem, I'm going to use that word a lot today, we have to have a systemic understanding of what's going on for that entire system. And humans, we are complex systems. That's what we are. So this was the inspiration. I saw the publication about the mother that died, and I what a waste. And think about how hard this is for the family, the daughter, the husband, and the extended family that is around this. How can you rectify the loss, the importance of this family member, the love lost, all of this surrounding such a death that has such a high magnitude to the family unit. I just couldn't imagine losing my wife, as an example, over taking a weight loss drug. And that got me into this broadcast this morning, which this is going to be a weekly thing, I hope. All right, I've started in again. Why did this happen, and can't we, like, isn't there another way? And I think if you're listening to me right now and you're in this space that I'm in, the low carb space, you know that already the answer, the punchline to this. There is another way, and there is a holistic way to approach this issue that allows for the same level of weight loss, that allows for the reversal of type 2 diabetes, that allows you to put gout in remission, that allows you to reverse cardiovascular issues. All right, there is a holistic way to do this. There is a massive amount of resistance to it, right? Not only with the level of the medical establishment itself, the resistance that is bought and paid for also by the pharmaceutical industry, but also on a cultural level, there is a great deal of resistance to this by the people that are actually afflicted. And I will address some of those issues too. Keep in mind that in addition to the fact that I'm a PhD biochemist and this is what I do, I spend at least 30 hours a week with my nose in the literature, looking at published science from all disciplines to help me understand what the metabolic, the biochemical drivers are that lead to the dysfunction that leads to these diseases. Why? Because I want to be able to better help my clients make intelligent decisions about their lifestyle, 85% of which is essentially what they're putting in their mouth. How can you change the way that you're eating to get the weight loss that you want, if that's your major thing, right? Or again, reversing the diabetes, reversing the cardiovascular issues, putting gout in remission, right? These are my goals, to help people do that. So I'm spending massive amount of times with my head in the literature in order to understand how we get to this dysfunction in the first place, and then what are the strategies to reverse it. And I've got 5 years of experience in this field now, coaching. I'm probably the only one in this space that has spent 30 days living with a client who is a sugar addict and helping him reverse diabetes, to get into recovery. And what I mean by the recovery is not overeating the sugar anymore, and so on. And this is what I do now. We were also going to talk about at the end of the presentation the other components besides the food. Now, everyone has seen. I call this the dancing lady. So let's listen to a part of this, and then we'll make some observations about the imagery that the drug industry here is promoting. Okay, so I call this advertisement the dancing lady. And what are the observations that we can make about this, right? So imagine you're sitting in your living room, and I'm 65 years old. So at the point where the evening hour comes around, my wife and I, we watch the news cycle, and what happens during the advertisements between when the commentators are talking. You get the phone book of advertisements for these weight loss drugs, for diabetes drugs, for cardiovascular drugs, for asthma drugs. The majority of these pills that are being pushed on us, right, are in the area of metabolic diseases. And metabolic diseases are diseases that can be dealt with by what we put in our mouth. That's the first lesson that I learned 5 years ago, or that is the first lesson that I learned when I actually started studying biochemistry decades ago, right? When my nose was in the university level textbooks and I'm studying metabolism. So when I got that email from the doctor, and 5 years ago when I turned 60, and that email said, well, you're pre-diabetic, you're overweight, you're a gout sufferer, uh, eat less, exercise more, and don't worry, this is a progressive disease, but we've got some really good drugs for you, right? This is what basically the email said. First thing I did, besides getting angry about this, right? Because at the time I was a third-year CrossFit athlete, was I sat back and I realized from all the training that I had in the area of biochemistry that I was suffering from metabolic diseases, and therefore they should be able to be mitigated by what I put in my mouth. That was my starting point in this 5 years ago. And it turns out that this is absolutely a true statement. It is. Now let's look at this picture, and I want to talk about the observations. The first thing is the singing lady here, this character, is significantly overweight. She's obese. And if you watch this commercial very carefully, they show her trying on different dresses, which are all oversized. So the first thing is they want to promote to you that your obesity is perfectly okay, right? That this body image is perfectly fine. Don't feel bad about it. Well, it's true that some obesity can be in the context of a healthy metabolic profile, right? But most obesity is not this way, right? Most obesity can be considered a comorbidity. It's not healthy. And usually it's in combination with other comorbidities like type 2 diabetes or prediabetes, which is you're on the train headed to type 2 diabetes, cardiovascular disease. I work with gout sufferers, right? And there are probably the majority of the gout sufferers that contact me have weight issues, right? And when the weight starts to come down, when we change the way that we're eating, I'm going to emphasize that when we change the way that we're eating and the weight starts to come down, usually we see their gout come into remission. Not all the time, and I don't want to get off on a tangent here because there are nuances to the gout problem that don't exist like it is. It's easier to reverse diabetes than it is to get gout into remission. Let me just put it that way, because there are other issues surrounding that. But the same central biochemistry that's driving that metabolic condition. So the first thing is they're trying to make us feel good about being overweight in this commercial. They are. And if you are somebody like me who spent the last 5 years eating low carb and you've gone shopping for clothes, it's actually harder for me to find pants now than it was 5 years ago. Why? Because everything on the rack is oversized now. It's all oversized because we are all overweight. And a very large proportion of us are obese. 52% of people that are older are obese. And when you add in the overweightness to that, it's 74% of our population is walking around that's overweight and obese. This has really become a much bigger problem for our children now. And it has to do with the way that we're eating. And I'm going to get into that detail in a minute. And then the next thing is they have this character acting like she's in a really good mood and she's really happy about being diabetic and overweight. Seriously, I want to ask you guys a question, because what is the reality of this? And the reality is that when I was diagnosed as being pre-diabetic and I was overweight and I didn't feel good about walking around anymore, I was tired all the time, right? And going up a flight of stairs was not that easy, right? I was there too. And I know what this feels like. And when I looked in the mirror and I looked at myself and I went introspective about this and I thought about my condition, the last thing I was dancing around in a square with a whole bunch of other people in my condition going, oh, well, this is perfectly okay with me. And thank you very much, doctor, for this pill that I can use to lose weight, right? And 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 somehow this is going to make everything better. Well, look at the results of these weight loss drugs. Besides the fact that they're costing over $1,000 a month in a lot of cases, right? Because insurance is not covering these, and now the side effects are rearing their ugly head, with some people actually succumbing and dying, right? There has to be another way. There is another way. And that really is about you coming to terms with understanding your own metabolism and the fact that you have actual control of this. And it doesn't involve having to take drugs that turn out, in my opinion, to be dangerous in order to achieve these results, which in the end, if you stop taking the drug and you go back to the way that you were eating and exercising and sleeping and the stress element in there, you're just going to gain all the weight back. And you're going to get all your comorbidities back. The diabetes is going to come back. The gout is going to rear its ugly head again. I mean, all these things are just going to come roaring back. So this is just an aside very quickly. These drugs are called GLP-1 agonists because they hyperactivate the way your normal hormonal system with this particular protein operates. This is just to show you that GLP-1 has global effects. And in what I'm going to call a normal eating platform, and when I say normal eating platform, I'm not talking about the standard American way of eating. And I'm going to go into some detail about that. I'm talking about eating in a more intelligent way where we have stopped with the input of sugar. We have cut down substantially on alcohol. We're making sure that we're not eating hyperglycemic meals. These are meals that are very, very high in foods like grains and potatoes that substantially elevate the amount of circulating glucose that's arriving at the liver. Under conditions where people are eating ancestrally, right? They're eating food in a way that is appropriate for a human, then this particular hormone is produced at the levels and in the proportions that it should be in order to do the very important functions that it does, which is to elevate satiety. That's the point where you put the fork down and go, okay, I've had enough to eat. And amongst the other functions. So you may want to pause the video and just study this for a minute. When we are eating the standard American way that has all the things in it that I just talked about that shouldn't be there on a chronic level, and you're taking these GLP-1 agonists, which hyperactivate the function of this hormone, then what happens is that you're basically overriding a system. And yes, you are getting the weight loss, but without addressing what you're putting in your mouth, ultimately you haven't stopped driving the dysfunction. And you need to think about that, because this is why the side effects are happening, which can lead, we know, to the death of a mother, which was and is devastating to this family and tragic. It brings tears to my eyes when I think about this. I can't imagine losing my wife over a weight loss drug. Now, when we look at the evolution of humans and we compare ourselves to other animals, I don't know what it is with our culture. We tend to take humans and put us on a pedestal and act as if we're not animals. Like somehow we're disconnected from the rest of the animal kingdom. And I got news for you, people. We're not. We evolved and we are on this planet in 2023 because, not unlike the rest of the animals, but more like them, we developed the capacity in what we ate, the food sources back when we were hunter gatherers and living in caves. That's a metaphor. To have the preference for certain macronutrients, because those macronutrients, when we ate them, allowed us to shift from a metabolic platform of burning and the production of energy to a storage platform where we could very rapidly convert those incoming nutrients into fat, glycogen, and also the storage of water very rapidly. And the reason that we needed to do that is because the next day we had to get up, leave the cave, and go out and struggle to maintain our food supply. And it doesn't matter which group of humans, ancient humans that you look at, whether or not they were eating carbohydrates uh, um, in their eating platform. Those are ridiculous arguments, right? When we look at hunter-gatherers and the systems that they used to live in, the common biochemistry was this ability to take certain macronutrients that they're eating, rapidly convert them into fat, glycogen, and water. This allowed them to leave the cave in whatever system that they were operating in, go out and resupply and get more of the native foods that they were eating, bring that stuff back to the cave and start the cycle all over again. We are no different than the rest of the animal kingdom. There are nuances in how all of us and how we all do this. I'm not saying that we have the same metabolism as a mosquito or a grizzly bear or the ruby-throated hummingbird in this case, or the godwit, which is my favorite hero in this slide, because that particular bird, prior to its 8,400-mile migration, would go bonkers on its food supply, rapidly storing all those incoming nutrients as fat, actually reducing the size of organs that were not needed for the flight. And then during the migration, 8,400 miles nonstop, if they didn't store enough fat before the migration, then they would just die and fall into the ocean. So, I mean, every single one of the animals that are on this slide have a story to tell. And our story is not any different than theirs. All animal systems have developed this capability in their metabolism, these integrated pathways, when certain macronutrients come in, for those macronutrients to be stored as fat. There's an increase in systemic inflammation to support their immune system. They, in the case of animals that have hearts and blood supplies, there's an increase in blood pressure to make sure that those nutrients get to where they need to go and get into the organs that need them. This is a very important concept. We are not functioning, our metabolic systems are not functioning in a dysfunctional way. They are doing exactly what they evolved to do. The problem is that we are activating these pathways chronically, 24/7, week in, week out, month after month, and year after year. And over time, our system is becoming dysfunctional because of the chronic activation of these pathways, along with the organ damage that comes with it. Fatty liver, for example, dysfunction at the level of the pancreas, dysfunction at the level of our adipose tissues, thinking about the obesity problem, dysfunction at the level of our muscle, and, by the way, people, dysfunction at the level of the brain. So here I'm just reviewing the central biochemistry we're going to be talking about today. For now, I'm calling it fructose uric acid biochemistry. I think that as we go into the future with this, among other scientists, we're going to have to change the name of this. And the reason that we are is because people have a knee-jerk reaction when I start talking about this, or other investigators are talking about this, because they go, well, we've eliminated fructose from our diet, and this is irrelevant. No. We're talking about integrated pathways here, and in some respects, it's just about it. In fact, maybe the major effect is in fact the glucose. And I will talk about that relationship between the glucose and fructose uric acid biochemistry in a second, and how these integrated pathways, the fructose uric acid component, is the way in which we have the rapid conversion of macronutrients into fat, how we get the sudden acute rise in systemic inflammation, how we get the alteration in the nitric oxide pathways. This is how that happens. So one of the key factors here is to think about, is to no longer think about metabolism as isolated pathways, glycolysis and its connection to the mitochondria. All over presentations now, we're hearing about mitochondria. No big surprise, because the mitochondria, I'm telling you people right now, is at the center of this. We have the glycolytic pathway, whose purpose it is. Let me just go to the next slide. Glycolytic pathway is shown ideally here in gray, and its main purpose when circulating glucose is low is to provide major biochemical substrates, pyruvate and lactate, to the mitochondria, where those substrates are going to be converted into the energy currency of the cell, which at the simplest level is ATP in the burning state. And I want you guys to start thinking about it this way. Under conditions of circulating glucose that are low, then glycolysis is mainly providing these substrates to the mitochondria, but the mitochondria itself is also in a burning mode. So the fats that are in the diet are being delivered also to the mitochondria in the form of acyl-CoAs. Those are converted by the process of beta oxidation to produce also energy currency, which is ATP. Now, the reason why the evolution of humans focus so much on fat storage is because when we look at the production of ATP by the burning of fat versus the burning of glucose, there's on the simplest level to think about this, there's about a 3 to 4-fold difference. In other words, we're getting 3 to 4 times as much ATP out of the burning cycle for a particular type of fat. Say we're burning palmitate, which has 16 carbons, for example. We're going to get about 109 ATPs out of that. Whereas when we burn an equivalent amount of glucose, right, the glucose that enters in to the glycolytic pathway, 1 mole of that, or 1 molecule of that comes in, 1 mole of it, we're going to end up producing around 32 ATPs. And when you divide that out to keep things really simple here, 109 divided by 32, and these are approximate numbers, right? Because not all fats are the same. And then how that glucose is modulated through this process there can be some nuances there. But when we divide this out, you're going to get a 3 to 4-fold benefit in burning fat. This is in the burning mode. And culturally, when we're talking to doctors about this, we're talking to other influencers out there that don't really understand the low carb lifestyle, they're going to act like the burning mode is happening all the time, even when we're eating. And I got news for you. It's not happening all the time. We're looking at integrated pathways that shift in proportion to the amount of macronutrients that are coming in at the level of the liver. And the pancreas is involved in this too. But obviously, because when the pancreas is exposed to the incoming glucose in the portal vein, it's releasing insulin in response to that. So this is going on in the background and also at the level of the liver. And we're focused on the action at the liver. So I want to just say that. And remember, we are dealing with systems, but I've got to focus in order to talk about this from the point of view of the organ that I think is the captain of all this. And I'm not disproportionating the pancreas. It's very important in this process. But at the level of the liver, under low glucose, we have glycolysis, again, whose purpose is to provide these important substrates, the pyruvate and the lactate, to the mitochondria. We also have the delivery of acyl-CoAs, the fatty acids that are coming in from the meal, for example, and also the fatty acid that's pooled in the liver into the mitochondria where we have burning of energy. But here's the thing. As the glucose rises, we are going to pass a threshold. And as we cross that threshold, we activate a new enzyme at the head of the glycolytic pathway called glucokinase. At the same time, under the same glucose concentrations at the level of the liver, we also activate aldose reductase. And this is an enzyme which is sitting at the head of a very important pathway called polyol. And the purpose of the polyol is to shunt, at the point where we pass that threshold, up to 30% of the incoming glucose into endogenous fructose, which then collapses through the fructose uric acid metabolism, which has the following effects. We have an acute decline in the cellular ATP at the level of the liver. We have an acute decline in the level of phosphate. We have an acute rise in uric acid, which is one of the most misunderstood molecules metabolically. Uric acid is not a waste product of purine metabolism. Is it produced as a product of purine metabolism? Of course. But uric acid is a signaling molecule. And as the acute rise happens at the level of the liver, it activates a level of processes which it's a cascade. And today I am only going to focus on the layman outcome of what that acute rise is, which is the activation of de novo lipogenesis, the inducement of insulin resistance. We have also the reduction of the insulin receptor at the level of the liver. There are serious insulin consequences here. And this is why I'm arguing that this shift in metabolism is actually at the core of the carbohydrate insulin model of obesity. So we have the elevation of systemic inflammation, which evolutionarily its purpose was to stimulate the immune system. We have an elevation of blood pressure. We have dysregulation of the nitric oxide pathway at the level of the liver, etc. We actually have here what amounts to a shift in states. We're moving from a burning state to a state of storage, systemic inflammation, and alteration of blood pressure. And I am calling this state the red state, and I'm calling the burning state the white state. And under conditions where we get this metabolic shift, which is going to be hyperglycemia, alcohol, added sugars with bringing the fructose in, high umami, which is you can relate this to eating high levels of processed food and processed meats. All of these cause this metabolic shift that actually involves the decoupling of the mitochondria. We go from a mitochondria that is burning to a mitochondria which is no longer burning substrate to produce ATP, but instead is facilitating the production of de novo lipogenesis, which, all right, let's move to the next slide here. This essentially is what I call a combinatorial tsunami. This is the standard American diet, which is hyperglycemic. So when you look down at a plate, you will consistently see the presence of foods on that plate that outweigh everything else that's there, the protein and incoming fat, for example. And the carbohydrates that are there are usually easily converted into glucose in the circulatory system. So we're talking about things like grains, potatoes, added sugars of certain types. Then we have the processed food and meat, which is all part of the same meal. And in the evening meal, especially with adults, we're going to have the addition of alcohol, which is complementary or combinatorial to all these things. Alcohol activates the same metabolism that we're talking about, and especially in combination with hyperglycemia. So this outlines the model that I'm proposing that not only explains eventually what turns out to be the dysfunction, the obesity, the diabetes, the gout, the cardiovascular disease, which is now rampant in individuals that are 60 years or older. And we have this shift that happens specifically because of the combinatorial tsunami, which is our meals that in combination, not just alone here, that are hyperglycemic, the presence of alcohol, the umami component, which is bringing in high quantities of glutamate, inosine monophosphate, adenosine monophosphate, salt, and added sugar, right? This is mainly, I'm describing right now, anything that you're eating out of a box, bottle, or package, or in a restaurant scenario. And I'm going to give you pictures of examples of this in a minute. The added sugar component, I don't know how many family events that I've gone to. Dessert on top of eating the way I'm describing is always served. Amazing. The cake, the ice cream, the pies, down the road we go, right? It's just, and we have what? Thanksgiving coming up at the end of this month, and Christmas. And this is the quintessential place where we see desserts out the wazoo. So now, as we go forward in the presentation, I'm going to be talking about shifting between the white state and the red state. When I'm talking about the red state, I'm talking about the advent of these macronutrients in the combination that I'm talking about here. The red state is typified by high glycemia, high insulin, right? This is where your hyperinsulinemia it becomes a factor, especially in the peripheral tissues, because the hyperinsulinemia is being propagated off the liver along with the insulin resistance. We have the de novo lipogenesis, which is the production of oil droplets directly in the liver, packaging of triglycerides into VLDLs that are being pumped into the circulatory system. And in cases where the liver has already been damaged, right, we're already moving towards a state of fatty liver, then we also have hepatic insulin resistance, which is typified by the production of glucose in the liver under conditions that are hyperglycemic from the meal. We have powerful behavioral conditions that are being generated when we have the red state activated. On the left, we're talking there about the biochemical drivers, the fat accumulation that's going on, the glycogen synthesis that's happening, elevated leptin resistance, which means that we've got dysregulation of the hunger hormones. Think in the back of your mind what's going on with the GLP system, all right? Because we know that fructose has a relationship with the GLP-1 receptor, and it is changing the relationship between the GLP-1 hormone that should be driving satiety at the level of the brain, the relationship of the GLP-1 with its receptor there. There is data that shows that central fructose can disrupt this relationship. In the insulin resistance, the elevated blood pressure, the systemic inflammation, the downregulation of nitric oxide at the level of the liver, and the alteration of nitric oxide signaling in the other organ systems. We know from hundreds of publications that not not only animal studies, but also clinical studies that were done by Johnson, over 700 publications over the years, that when we activate the red state, we're driving hunger, we increase the intake of food. So if you sit two people down, right, I'll give you a metaphor. If you sit two people down at the table with two individualized buffets, one is low carb, a low carb buffet, and the other individual is eating the standard American buffet. The individual eating the low carb environment is going to put their fork down first. The individual eating the standard American buffet is going to eat longer. They're going to go back to the buffet for more food, and their intake will increase. That's what we're talking about here. There is a preference for sugar with an increased preference for fructose in humans. Think evolution. Why the fructose preference? Because fructose hyperactivates the metabolism, the red state that we're talking about, maximizing the amount of fat, the conversion of these nutrients into fat. Remember that that's what was important to us as hunter-gatherers. So very powerful behavioral changes are induced when we eat the way I'm describing. So now we're going to run through this. What kinds of meals are going to activate this pathway? And what I did was I chose things that over the last 5 years, observing the way people eat when I'm out with them, both on an extended family level and looking around the restaurant and so on. All right. So the famous pizza with beer meals, right? This you're in the red state, absolutely in the red state. The sushi meal, right? Look at all the rice that's in there, and then the soy sauce, which usually is going to be very, very high in umami and salt and sugar, right? Okay, boom, red state. Look down there and to the right. This is a very typical fried chicken meal, right? Somebody goes to Colonel Sanders, and this is what you're going to get. You've got the breaded chicken there, very high in salt and sugar and umami. And look at the white bread biscuit there, and then we've got the mashed potatoes with the gravy. I used to slurp stuff down like that, like there was no tomorrow. Massive red state meal. And then I put this one in there because recently in an extended family, and I see this all the time, individuals that are elevated cardiovascular risk, multiple stents, metabolic cancers happening. And what are we doing with our kids? We're teaching them how to have these pancake meals that have the quote unquote healthy fruits that are high in fructose, with the pancakes, which are hyperglycemia, with the added sugar that is in those, possibly also the added salt. This is a major red state meal happening on an empty stomach, usually early in the day, not counting when we look at the pattern and way most people are eating, right? They start with this. 2 hours later, we have the mid-morning snacks, which are also hyperglycemic, the added sugar, right? We've heard other influencers talking about this in our space, right? They elevate the insulin right away in the first morning meal. They do it again at the snack, right? Then we have the lunch meal, and the lunch meals very likely could look like this, right? And when you look at each of these, whether or not there's beer at lunch, I don't know. Maybe that's a dinner meal, but down in the center there, we've got the high sugar soda, the hyperglycemic fries that were most likely deep fried in seed oils, where the oil hasn't been changed for months in this particular restaurant. Then we've got the burger with the hyperglycemic buns that have the added sugar. I mean, this is endless, right? The whole point is, and then you think about what there's going to be a mid-afternoon snack, which is going to be, again, a hyperinsulinemic type of meal. And then there's going to be the dinner meal that will have the classic portion of the plate that's going to be really large in rice or potatoes or some type of hyperglycemia, which is going to outweigh everything else that's going to be on the plate. And I wanted to throw this slide in because these are really typical breakfasts. And I hear this all the time, not only from clients, right? The yogurt. We start out with the low-fat yogurt in the morning, and they've got their hyperglycemic fruit in there with it usually is high in fructose, right? These have been growing in our food industry now. And, when you look in the wild at wild strawberries, they're nothing like this, right? There's little teeny berries that are tart without much fructose in them, right? These things oversized, they've been bred to be high in fructose because fructose is so much sweeter than glucose and so on. We're going to have the quote unquote healthy honey that's involved in this. There's the cereal over there on the right that so many families are not only eating themselves but feeding to their kids, right? We're red state right out of the gate. And down and left is the heart healthy oatmeal with the high fructose berries that are in there. The dark chocolate, we hear about the dark chocolate all the time. That's in there. And then we got the croissants. These are for the bread guys who, I was one of those that down and right. And an hour or two later in the break room is going to be the bagels with the spreads that go on those and so on. The whole point is at the end of the day, literally about an hour before they get into bed, their insulin has never come down the entire day. And they've been in the red state for the vast majority of the hours. Very rarely, if at all, in the burning state. And we know that over decades, that if you are staying in the red state 24/7, week after week, month after month, this is why as we age especially, and this is moving down into our children because they're eating this way out of the gate. Guys like me weren't eating this way as early because the nutritional guidelines didn't come out until like the published ones until like 82 or 83. And our parents leading up to that weren't eating this way until then. And then as children, we started approximately in those years. But now we have babies that are coming into this world that came through gestation, still in the mother, eating this way because the mother was eating this way. And then as babies with formula that are so high in the refined carbohydrates, this is why obesity now has moved down into our children. This is why more young adults, you see these guys walking around in their late 20s already with the insulin resistant guts. They literally can eat off of the top of their stomach, right? They could put their plates there and eat. They can put their mug of beer on that stomach and drink it later in the day. So the whole question is, after all of that, how do we shift from the red state to the white state? How do we spend the majority of our waking hours during the day in the white state? And the way that we do that is by eliminating the major drivers. So we stop eating added sugar. We reduce or eliminate the amount of alcohol that we're drinking. We stop with the hyperglycemia. That means we eliminate the high amount of potatoes and grains and added sugars that we have in our diet. We stop eating processed food. So we don't eat out of packages and bottles anymore. We buy food that looks like food. We cut it up and we cook it ourselves. We stick to 3 meals a day without snacking. And you find that when you shift to a diet like this, rarely do you need the snacks. Now, depending on your activity level, there's a lot of people when we shift to an eating platform like this that will eventually evolve to only eating 2 meals a day. But this, whether you eat 2 or 3 meals a day, is going to also depend on your level of activity. Some of us, if you're listening to this today and you already suffer from comorbidities, like you're obese, you're type 2 diabetic, and you suffer from gout, let's just say, all right, then you're going to be cutting into the carbs and bringing them even lower. And I'll give you some examples of how we eat this way in a minute. I'm going to show you pictures of this. And if that's the case, then when you make this shift, you want to get metabolically stable, which means that you need to be eating this way for 2 or 3 months before you start tweaking around the meal plan. Make sure that you're eating a wide variety of different proteins, and also you move away from seed oils to eating natural fats. These are things like lard, beef tallow, olive oil, avocado oil, coconut oil, and I probably forgot one, but any of the natural oils are fine. Butter, for example. I advocate, and this comes from Atkins, those of you that are older are going to remember back, because I can remember my parents doing the Atkins diet for a while, right? And I don't like calling this a diet because we are not calorie restricting formally. We are not sitting back and counting calories and going, okay, I'm only going to eat this many calories every single day. No. For those of us that already have a physiological weight that we like, then you need to be making sure that you're getting enough food every single day. My main thing is that eating this way is really easy. You're looking at what I advocate is the plate method. You just split the plate into 3 parts. The vegetables that we're eating are low carb, green listed vegetables, I call them, but low carb vegetables, non-starchy, and they occupy 2 parts of the plate. The protein is in the 3rd part. These are examples. This is the way I eat. So the first observation is you can see the 2 plates are split into 3 parts. I've got protein on the left here. This is a steak meal, and you can see that the protein that I have here is actually quite substantial. Why is that? Because I'm an athlete and I work out really hard. 6 to 7 days a week, I'm doing something. There's never a day in the week where I'm not active, but I'm actively working out for at least 5 to 6 days out of the week, something every single day. The plate on the right, the difference in the protein, here you're looking at pork loin. And then there are good examples of low carb vegetables on both of these plates: yellow squash, roasted Brussels sprouts, asparagus, steamed cauliflower. Really popular in my household, however, is baked cauliflower is really popular. And this is just to outline the kinds of breakfasts that are actually healthy. Protein, high natural fats. In every single one of these, you can see that there are eggs. And the eggs are being cooked in different ways. We have eggs that are fried. The plate on the right here is a sauce that I make myself that is in the drippings of the bacon or the sausage that I made in the meal. If I'm eating sausage, it's not sausage out of a package from a standard supermarket. It's locally sourced. I know exactly what they're putting into it, what they're putting in it. And then down here on the lower left, you can see that there is an omelet that's got low carb vegetables in it, along with various types of cheese. Now to finish, I've been mainly talking about what you put in your mouth. Let's not forget that there are other components to this, and exercise is one of those. Now, one of the things that I refuse to do is to be apologetic about this. What I mean by that is that there seems to be in our culture this effort to say all you need to do is go for a walk 3 times a week for 30 minutes. And I'm here to tell you that this is bogus. As we age, it's super crucial that, yes, we get out and we do the walking. Walking is really good for you, but there has to be strength training in there. And there needs to be intensity work, stuff that we do that causes your heart rate to come up. Case in point, I was out for a walk yesterday. So I'm not arguing against walking. I was out for a walk yesterday. And what do I find out there? I find an old lady who'd fallen over on the side of the damn street, laying next to the curb, right? You guys got to realize as we age that a full quarter of us, when we reach 60, have high falling risk. Why is that? It's because we are not working out anymore in the context of our world. You know, when a human gets up and you walk around on the surface of the planet, there's way more involved in not falling over than you think, right? Understanding on an intuitive level how we interact with that space is super important. And you can't get that equilibrium, if you will, with your planet without developing your strength and your coordination and your balance. And how are you going to do that? You can't do it just by walking on a sidewalk every day. You've got to interact with your space in ways that cause you to have to bend over, pick things up that are heavy, move them in coordinated ways. You've got to work on your core strength. All these things are really important. And why is falling down a risk for us? Because when you fall down, you break things, hips, legs, arms, and we can't afford that unless you want to spend the years that you've got coming as an aged individual, sitting in a chair, potentially on oxygen, with your feet up. You think about how that's going to be for your grandchild. Here's my wife out on a recent walk that we did on the trails, and we've got our grandson with us, right? So we intend to age with elegance. That's what we intend to do. And I'm telling you right now, you can't do that. And you can't have metabolic health unless you are moving. That's the walking part. Unless you're picking up weight, and unless you're doing intense exercise that causes your heart rate to actually come up. Dream. You got to dream. Think back to when you were younger, right? And the things that you love to do. And maybe you're one of those guys that all you ever did was sit on a sofa playing video games. Well, think about maybe now what it is you might want to do that causes you to get off that couch and go and do it. Get good at doing it, right? Spend some time doing it. What does this function to do? It gets you moving off the sidewalk, interacting in a three-dimensional way with your world, and that's going to increase the level of your balance, your core strength, your agility, all of these things that are super important to being able to be healthier in the long run. Sleep is super important. Do you realize that 50 to 80% of the obese suffer from sleep apnea? And the problem with sleep apnea is that during the sleep cycle, you actually stop breathing at intervals. And this generates a hypoxic environment in your metabolic systems. And hypoxia activates the red state. And the more that you are in the red state, the more dysfunctional your metabolism is going to be. This is contributing to the obesity problem, right? So get sleep tested and find out if you have an apnea problem. Remarkably, when you shift to a low carb environment, sleep cycles and the apnea does improve, but it doesn't necessarily end. So you need to get sleep tested. And if you are apnea, you need to be treated for it. And there are treatments out there that don't involve having to get a CPAP machine. There are treatments out there that are holistic and can help you get past the apnea. And lastly, deal with the stress that's in your life, because finding ways to de-stressify. And again, the problem with the stress is that it's activating the red state. It is activating the red state. So if you are in a job situation, if you are living in a family environment that has elevated stress, you need to find a way to bring it down because it contributes to the red state. It's a contributor to driving this metabolic imbalance with you, if you will, the amount of time that you are spending in that state. And so with that, I'm going to close. I have my contact information in the description. And I will see you next time, next Friday at 7 a.m. for another segment in my perspective about metabolic health and the reversal of these conditions.